Previously, our heroes Chicken Wings, the halfling rogue, and Philip, the half-elf wizard, were on their way to Phandelver to deliver supplies to Gundren Rockseeker. However, on their way, they discovered evidence that Gundren had been captured by goblins. So they tracked it back to a goblin cave, and that's where we begin this week's adventure. Alright, so this is the second entry in our Lost Mine of Phandelver campaign. If you didn't feel like watching the first video, I'm running this campaign for very new players. So a lot of the first session was spent learning the rules, but I was excited for this session because, you know, they were plunging into this dungeon, and that's half of the game. So the first time around was just 2 players, which was scary because I didn't want to kill them. So luckily they were able to round up a third person to play, and this person fell in between the age range of Chicken Wings and Philip, so it's a really diverse group, really interesting to see how it'll shake out. But he is also new to the game. So as Philip and Chicken Wings were resting, I had a rustling in the bushes, and then this new player stride out as a Dwarven Cleric, which is fortunately who we chose. And again, these guys really aren't used to role-playing, and we had a whole dungeon to do, so I kind of like, hey, you guys recognize this is another mercenary, this is another hired hand, you're pretty sure he's cool. But I let the new player introduce his character, and so he proudly announced that his name was Cheese Flaps. Apparently he had consulted with Chicken Wings before we started playing as to what his name should be, so now the party consists of Cheese Flaps, Chicken Wings, and Philip. So they chat for a little bit, and they decide to foray into the cave, and I introduced the concept of seeing in the dark with dark vision versus not being able to and needing a light source. Both Philip and Cheese Flaps could see in the dark, but Chicken Wings, being halfling, could not. I expected them to want to bring Chicken Wings along, so I expected them to create a light source like a torch or the cleric's light cantrip. However, Chicken Wings wasn't too keen on that idea. He was the one who didn't want to go in the cave, which was funny because I wanted them to have a third player so they had a better chance at this cave. They wanted themselves to have a third player so they had a better chance at this cave. And so now here we were with Chicken Wings, like, almost refusing to go into the cave. It had been a little bit since we played, so I rewrote what the goblin guards were eating outside as chicken wings, and I think the player was so excited about that, he didn't really want to leave that alone, so he was like, I want to munch on these chicken wings at the entrance to the cave, and I'll stand guard. Which, to be fair, is a legitimate concern, so the players actually got to do survival checks to figure out what kind of scope were the goblin forces at, and I was essentially like, hey, you already know that their raiding party and their guards here are taken out, and so there probably aren't any other goblins on their way back. You can kind of tell by the tracks of like how many like are in and out, and I was really trying to strongly hint that there was no reason for Chicken Wings to stand guard out here. Again, I'm still learning as a DM, so I might have been a little heavy-handed with that, but Chicken Wings sort of stuck to his guns and wanted to stand guard, so I was like, okay, let's go, let's send these 2 people into the cave. Maybe it was that they were expecting like a shallow cave rather than this whole goblin hideout, which is the actual dungeon. But anyway, we forged in. And the first encounter that you come across when you head into the cave is 3 chained-up wolves to one side. Now this is where I probably could have handled it better as a DM, because in the notes it has a lot of possibilities for where this encounter can lead, and I think I got too tripped up in all of them and kind of used all of them. So what can happen is, 1, the players go into the wolves' den and fight the wolves, combat. 2, the players try to go by the wolves, and even though the chains are just out of reach, the wolves can try to break the chains and chase after the players, combat. Or 3, the players can roll animal handling to try to soothe the wolves and kind of go by them that way. So Philip and Cheese Flaps did the second option of just trying to go by them, and I rolled, and the wolves actually did break their chains. So I was like, hey, everybody roll initiative, it's combat, and this is where I tried to pull Chicken Wings back into the party, because I was still desperate inwardly to get him into this cave. And he was first, and he had the idea, at that moment, to try to soothe the wolves. Because he had meat, he was like, hey, can I give these wolves chicken wings? And honestly, if he hadn't been with the party from the start, I wonder if that would have happened right away. But I let him roll for it, and he rolled really well, so I said that he soothed the wolves, and that combat was over. And that, to me, felt very anticlimactic. I didn't quiz my players about this, so I don't know how they felt about it, but me personally, I hated that I had started up combat and then finished it right away. I was so excited that Chicken Wings had thought about this, just, like a moment too late, that I wanted to reward him for it. Maybe I could have said that the wolves were whipped up into so much of a frenzy that they couldn't be tamed. But I don't know. Moving on. But one thing that I did know beforehand, I was like, if someone thinks to try to tame the wolves, they're going to want them as pets. And they're not rangers, so that's not going to happen. And so Chicken Wings was like, hey, can I take this along with me? And I was like, hey, you soothed him, but you didn't tame him. He's still a wild animal. He kind of took the meat and retreated back into his den with the other wolves. That's a win in your book, because you didn't have to fight some wolves. But then Chicken Wings almost immediately wanted to go back to his guard post, and I was like, geez, so close. He was so close to getting into that cave. And I realized the adventurers had been on the road most of that day, and now it was getting late, and so the sun was setting. So I think I framed this well enough that it wasn't just me forcing him into the cave, that he still got to make the choice, but because it was equally as inconvenient that it was dark inside and outside, he might as well go along with his friends and help out in this cave. But this is where the cave branches, and they take a left, which leads them to a group of goblins who are guarding Sildar, who was accompanying Gundren on his way to Phandelver. The characters were being successfully stealthy, so I let them hang back and plan out their tactics. That's a bread and butter part of D&D, and this was kind of the first time they'd gotten to do it. But I'm also a believer that time doesn't freeze when you plan, so eventually, after they had taken a long time talking about this, I had a goblin happen to get up and start walking towards the entrance to the cave, and at that point, they rolled initiative. Now in the notes it says that one of these goblins is named Ymik, and upon seeing the adventurers, he scoops up Sildar and threatens to kill him if the adventurers don't back off. The adventurers didn't care. The notes include this subplot where Ymik tries to get the adventurers to conspire against the actual leader of the cave, which I thought was interesting, but the party didn't think was interesting, so we moved right along into combat. Combat goes pretty well with 3 people. I let them know that they can tell that Sildar, this old guy, they don't know that he's Sildar yet, will die if they leave him unattended. And so they stabilize him while managing to fight all the goblins, and eventually all the goblins are defeated, except for one. And, I don't know what it is about Dungeons & Dragons and playing for the first time, but it's almost as if everybody knows that you could grab someone and interrogate them. I don't know where that comes from. Philip speaks Goblin and mentions this, and I probably should have let him be cool and be the only one to be able to interrogate this goblin, but I had internalized that goblins know common, which it says on their card, and so I kind of undermined his coolness, I realized later, unfortunately. But the adventurers ask a lot of the right questions. They want to know how many more goblins there are in the cave. They want to know if they took Gundren and where they took him. The goblin gives them an estimate of the remaining numbers because he's a goblin and he's bad at counting, but he explains that someone named the Black Spider hired King Grohl, the king of their tribe of goblins, who told Clarg, the leader of this cave, to capture Gundren. The players got a little turned around due to the goblin hierarchy, but I think we got there eventually. The players weren't quite sure what to do with the goblin after that, but talk naturally led to killing him off. Because even though they had promised him his life in exchange for information, he was still a goblin, and so they felt that they had no need to keep their word with him. So at this point, I had Sildar roused from his unconsciousness, and they were like, oh yeah, that guy. We really don't need you. I have so many regrets! So they talk with Sildar, and in the notes, he's this really cool, weathered, wise member of the Lord's Alliance, which is a group that strives to keep the land peaceful. And so I was like, hey, this guy's really cool. I use my cool, old man, wise voice. I expected the players to feel bad that this guy had gotten in the situation that he was in, but they were upset because I had framed him as someone Gundren had hired as a bodyguard, and so they were upset that he had failed to protect Gundren, their employer. So after a little bit of talking, they kind of brushed him off, and they're like, okay, I mean, I guess we can, like, tow you along now. I was taken aback by this because he has more information to divulge, but they weren't interested in talking to him very long. And after thinking about it, after we stopped playing, I was like, wait, they're right, this guy got taken down by goblins, which up until this point, they've been able to handily defeat. It's going to set up an interesting dynamic, because later he's supposed to be a symbol of authority and a quest giver. You know, he's supposed to point the adventurers to other places where they could go help. And now the adventurers don't really want to listen to him. I'll be interested to see how that shakes out later. At this point, we had been playing for a while, and we were still learning the rules, so I could tell that I was losing Philip. And I was going to lose my other 2 players soon because of just the amount of time played. So the book actually has like 3 more possible encounters, and I was like, you know what, that's not happening tonight. We're gonna just go to the final encounter. Well, you know, so I figured, well, I guess it's getting late, so I guess the goblins are going to sleep, and that's why they're all in the final cave with their boss, Clark. And so the players group up outside the entrance to this final cave, and Cheese Flaps had been reading more of his spells, and he was like, hey, thaumaturgy, how about this? Because if you're not familiar, thaumaturgy can create tremors. Not that kind, but the effect that it could make it sound like the cave was collapsing, and so the effect that Philip and Cheese Laps were hoping was going to happen was that the goblins would panic, and they would run out, and all the players would be ready with this death exit. They could just, you know, like, corner these goblins as they were going down this death chute. And I thought this was really clever. I thought it was nice that Philip and Cheese Flaps kind of were like, hey, I wonder if this would work. And so I wanted to encourage that. And so he used it, and I had one very panicky goblin run out, arms flailing, and they were like, okay, let's roll initiative. And I was like, no, don't worry. You guys are 4-1. You just, like, dice them. And they were like, okay, great, let's do it again. And I was like, well, hang on. Because I've read stories where a DM is like, okay, this works like this, and then the players just abuse that for the rest of the adventure. So I didn't want that to happen. I figured, you know, I've rewarded the creativity, but now I'm setting the limits. And so I was like, well, the goblins, we're kind of waiting to see what's happening. It seems like the rest have hunkered down and are waiting it out. But Cheese Slaps kept reading, and he was like, oh, hey, I can make my voice sound like anybody else's. And I was like, okay, whose voice are you going to make your voice sound like? And he was like, the king... Goblin guy, what's his face? And Chicken Wings chimed in and he's like, King Groll! Chicken Wings, even though he wasn't taking notes, he was picking everything up very easily. And I thought this was another clever idea. But I didn't want to throw him this one again for free, so I was like, roll a performance check. He had never heard King Groll. He doesn't know what King Groll sounds like. He can probably, you know, make something up. But gotta roll performance. And not one of the cleric's strongest suits, but hey, you still get to roll a die. And I was going to let this work. I was probably going to send out 2 goblins if he rolled high enough, but he rolled really poorly. He rolled single digits. And so I had Clark speak. I'm like, you know King Groll, I know King Groll. You come in here and fight. Stop using silly tricks. And the players were like, all right. I think they had gotten tired of planning, tired of tricks, and so they were ready to just go fight things again. This fight was interesting, and I probably could have fought it more honestly. I ended up pulling a lot of the punches that were thrown at the player. If I was rolling honestly, at least one player would have dropped to 0, and Sildar definitely would have, and that probably would have been a part that I didn't have to fudge, but I wanted the players not to hate him completely, so I kept him standing. But this was where Philip got to shine, because he used his sleep spell, which put all the tiny goblins to sleep, so they really only had to deal with Clark, the bugbear, and his wolf. Philip got the killing blow on Clark with Shocking Grasp, which he had actually done to Ymik in the previous battle, so I guess he's got sort of a calling card now. So they tidy up that battle because all the goblins are still asleep, and so they're able to just kind of execute them. But they do leave one goblin alive because they want to interrogate this one too. Now the answer that the players really wanted was, how many more goblins are there? And so I had the goblin answer with his information, Ymik's party is over in the eating cave. And Philip and Cheese Flops were like, oh my god, another group of goblins? But Chicken Wings was like, no, that's the leader of the group that we beat earlier. And I was like, hey, he knows what's up. Now, another important piece of information that the goblins can divulge is the location of Cragmar Castle, which is where Gundren has been taken to. Now, as written, this enables the players to go directly to the castle, but I wanted them to spend some time in Phandelver first, and I think they wanted to spend some time in Phandelver first, so I had the goblin tell them roughly where the castle is. And I have a plan for what the difference between roughly and exactly means for how they get there, and we'll see if they change their plans and decide they want to go directly there. But I had this goblin instead accept his fate, and he was like, yeah, no, I had a good run. Go ahead and kill me. You know, would have died pretty soon anyway. So they offed that one, and now that they had a chance to look around, they discover some treasure, and also supplies of a merchant company called the Lion Shield Coster, which will come up next time, I'm sure. And then Chicken Wings wanted to know if he could skin the wolf, and so I was like, I'm going to need some time to think about that one. This is a good place to close the night anyway, so, you know, let's shut the party down. So that was the second session, and I think it went well. It was fun. I think the third player added a nice mix to the party, and I think we're getting a handle on how the game works, and I'm getting a handle, more importantly, on what the players like about it. I have a sense that they are not going to care very much about everybody's background, everybody's tragic backstory. So I'm going to prepare in the future keeping that in mind. Because even though it is my game, how they play it is their input into the game. And so I think it's completely fair if they don't want to sit and listen to this guy who couldn't stand up to some goblins. So join us next time as the heroes venture to the town of Phandelver.